Hello, Arrakis. It's Dab86, and today I want to go over 5 things to improve the deep desert in Dune Awakening. Let's go ahead and dive right on in. So the first thing I want to go over is, of course, more enemies. Carrying them out in the deep desert, you see all this vast area of roaming wilderness that is the desert that lay out before us. But if you really look, there's only a handful of areas that will have enemies. The science lab, the crash ship, lots of this, and maybe a few Fremen areas. But most of this is empty environment. Tons and tons and tons of empty environment. No roaming enemies, no bans on vehicles of any type, and no air. You'd think that out of all the things, all the factions, whether it be the Sandflies, the Slavers, the Scavengers, the Sardaukar, the Atreides, the Landsrad, the Harkonnen, with that many factions, you'd think that there'd be people out here, not just players, but NPCs that would also be fighting for spice. But everyone out here's pretty much our buddies, except for a handful of areas around the map. If I had to take this and put it in shades of green, most of this, almost 90% of it would be in green. There's no threat to me just standing out here. Yeah, I might die of water, maybe heat, stuff like that. There's no threat to your base in the PvE area. Out and even in the PvP. Yeah, there might be some people, but what interaction do you have outside of that? Adding NPCs that you'd be able to fight more often, even in Haga Basin, would go a long way. Imagine Ornithopter attack squads that aren't players that you might have to go up against, especially against players that are just out there to attack players. NPCs that go out to gather spice, so you're having to compete with them and maybe even rob them. Maybe NPCs that want to try to raid your base as some sort of an invasion event. Well, they'll spawn out and you just have to kill them, and that's that. Maybe they'll have some loot. Maybe not. But if you want to bring a lot of bodies, even the handful, like from the science labs and stuff like that, there's not a lot of people. That brings me to my second part. Assault Ornithopters. Right now, they've been severely nerfed with the speed decrease due to having rockets. But why don't they have more weapons? The Wing has cannons on either side. Simple guns that could be used for maybe long-range attacks that may not do much, or even meant for anti-infantry. There used to be a utility slot on the cockpit that, for whatever reason, has now disappeared. I'm sorry the image here isn't as good as I'd like it to be, but you can see there, utility slots 1 on Assault Ornithopter cockpit. The second image, if you look, there on the cockpit almost looks to be some sort of twin cannons on the front, which seem to be completely lacking right here. You could easily make that maybe a short-range laser, maybe a short-range double shotgun, either meant for anti-infantry or anti-vehicle. But adding in more to it would allow it to do so much more. The other part, if you look, there's a co-pilot seat. And while in the co-pilot seat, it controls nothing. Has none of the special abilities, can fire none of the weapons, nothing. Giving some role to the Assault Ornithopter's co-pilot would go a long way as well. It wouldn't just be a solo plane that you're going to use to attack. It would allow a second gunner to use those weapons. And I know a lot of people will be like, well, what if I can't find a gunner? Well, you'd still have the main pilot, which maybe only can use rockets. Maybe they can only use the nose gun. Maybe they can only use the cannons. But that way, it also helps people wanting to play a more active role as it. More weapons, and then having a co-pilot. Allow it to do more. Let it take on more. But for whatever reason, I don't know why the utility slot was taken away from the cockpit nose. Maybe it was an aspect that they weren't ready to release that there will be a front nose gun weapon. And it could be, like I said, it could be a laser gun, shotgun, single cannon. You know, you have a few different options that you could put there. Same goes for the wing. Add a utility slot there that you would add the guns, and then maybe be able to rotate the guns out with other things, whether it be more of a Gatling style, maybe a long range cannon like that. Maybe shotguns, you know, allow it to have a role on what it's taking on, whether it be a ground unit, an air unit, or just straight out infantry. But that would be where I'd want to see the assault ornithopter go. The third item is capture points. Right now in the deep desert, that is a capture point. We're just outside the PvP area of it, but it could be so much more. Capture points should be bases with 3 capture points. The first one being an outer wall guarded by NPC soldiers. They should be able to take on air vehicles, because people will come in with air vehicles and they will rocket pod the crap out of whatever's there. And that way they can shoot that down, forcing people down into a role to fight an actual man-to-man combat. Once you've defeated the outer wall, you would then proceed to the inner part of the base. This would be more inside, like your labs or spaceships, and this would have more of a wave-based capture point, where while you defend it, there'll be waves of enemies and things of that nature, with the final capture point being some sort of a boss fight. You know, they're the leader of the capture point, whether it be, once again, the factions of the Sandflies, the Slavers, anybody. Could be Sardaukar, could be Harkonnen, could be Atreides, deserters, you name it. Once captured, the NPCs that would spawn there would be for the faction that captured it. So if Atreides captured it, the respawns would be Atreides. It would basically become a friendly zone for Atreides soldiers. Harkonnens coming into the area would be attacked on sight. And then, of course, the Harkonnen, if they were to take it and fight their way through it, they would take it. This would also allow the Atreides to defend it without having to worry about being attacked by the NPCs in the area. Becoming a safe haven, once again, if they're being chased by an enemy, such as a Harkonnen with rockets, whatever they may be using, they could fly there and get some support from the local Atreides garrison. It would require group play. Yes, you could solo the base, but it would take a large amount of time. It would be better to be in a group and attack with multiple people rather than doing it by yourself. The guild that did the most to contribute, such as killing enemies in the area, holding the point, stuff like that, would be awarded the points for holding the node. So they would be the ones that would be the ones technically having captured it. But of course, everyone would get points that would work towards that Landsrad group. It's just that the one that would get the ticking buff would of course be the guild, or they could even do it where multiple guilds, whoever participated, would get that tick as well. Not just that one guild, but only it would apply once for the overall Landsrad. Or you could also put it on its head and be, oh, these guys might have more contribution points than me, and have the Atreides faction turn on their own. Kill the other Atreides that are there, so that way they get less contribution points. You never know what could happen on Dune. And then, of course, there could also be small-scale invasion events where, whether it be one of the other factions, once again, the NPCs could reclaim it, forcing you to have to come and defend the capture point. But that would allow a much larger scale battle to happen rather than just some rocky hills. Because you got to remember, the Landsrad wants spice just as much. They're trying to catch the Emperor's eye as well. And maybe there'd be some, well, there can't just be bases out here built every week by the Landsrad. Why not? They're doing it every week. You would think the Landsrad would be dumping whatever they could into Dune, so that way they can move their faction ahead with the Emperor. So why wouldn't they build a base, sneak some spice, smuggle it, whatever they might be doing? You could even add some of the Landsrad turn-in people here. Make it not so hard to have to go back from the deep desert It would just require the Harkonnens or Atreides to own the base first. I'd be curious to know what some of your thoughts are when it comes to capture points. And that brings me to my fourth point, a shrinking PvE area. So right now what you're looking at is the map of the deep desert on planetologist.app. If you haven't already, the link will be down in the description so that way you can find it. It's a great way to find resources and the layout of the deep desert for the week. But right now you can see with the green square, that is the area that is considered safe for PvE unless you fly over one of the capture points. What if you were to take the entirety of it and make it all PvE? But over time, the area would begin to shrink on all sides except for the southern side. So this would be, just start going like this, like this, like this, like this. I wouldn't even mind if it went all the way back down to the bottom. And by the end of the week, there is no PvE area at all. So as soon as the week starts, everything would be PvE and immediately would start shrinking down. So they may have access to the I column, or I row, whatever you prefer. They may have access to up here at the beginning of this, but within a few hours they may not. So if a PvEer were to say, oh, I'm going to build a base so that way I can get as close to the ring as possible and get a whole bunch of spice, well, they build a base here. They might only be able to have that base for 2 days before the area of PvP expands to their base area. And if they don't move fast enough, they can find themselves getting their base wiped out by PvEer or PvPers. Within a few more days, it may be down to here, and PvE is having to fall back and build a second base. You throw in some of the other ideas that I've talked about. Roaming enemies, if you've got now players that can attack you and NPC ornithopters out there, you suddenly find yourself in a situation where your base may no longer be safe at all. It would definitely make it dicier. It would give PvEers more access to more of the materials, but not for a prolonged amount of time. Whether they like it or not, they would eventually end up in a PvP situation. And if you think, starting Monday night is when they do it, and it normally is done by like Tuesday morning, so you got to think, well, we'll say in all aspect. So 7 days. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So about 1.2 quadrant of a row would disappear a day. Maybe more. But that would definitely add a more of an aspect, kind of like with how you have some of like the Warzone and Fortnite, kind of a zone of effect. But like I said, all these sides would come crashing inwards. And they could leave it as that or not. They could just do it from the north. That would be perfectly fine as well. But that way it allows these outer areas to continue to be resource rich. My fifth and final point would be a PvP event starting about 8 hours before the Coriolis storm and continuing for about another 8 hours after. Think of this as the main households pulling out or entering the deep desert. This is when it's going to be at its spiciest. You know, the length of time could be longer, could be shorter. That could be negotiated. That's perfectly fine. When you first enter the deep desert, you of course have these. And this chooses where you would enter in the deep desert, but there should be another one right here, a main bar. Once you enter that, this is where you'd have to choose your faction. The unfortunality is there are servers out there that are predominantly either Atreides or predominantly Harkonnen. It would have to be balanced. So if there's too many Atreides currently in the PvP event, I'm sorry, but you'd have to at least participate as a free agent in the Harkonnen side, or vice versa. This way it allows for an even battleground to take place for everybody to participate in. You'd, of course, enter. You would confirm that you're entering in said PvP event. Once inside, you'd either start off on an Atreides frigate or a Harkonnen gunship. This is where you'd be able to start choosing your gear. Because the thing is, with PvP, what you'd also run into is you'd have characters that may just be getting out to the deep desert with no real gear, maybe past aluminum. So them going up against someone that's been in the deep desert endlessly may find it difficult to take down someone that's got, you know, two tiers of gear better than them. They're not the same, their damage won't be the same, their level might not be the same. So you'd start off on the ships. Here you'd be able to choose your gear, equip it, and that, well, if you're dying out there, you're not losing durability on your gear. It's a PvP event that you want people to participate in, not to be afraid that they're losing stuff that they've worked hard to get. Predominantly what you'd want is to fight for this territory here. I would probably say from Sector A6 to Sector A4, these three sectors right here. There'd be two types of currency. There'd be a fame for killing somebody, and two, an actual currency that you would use to buy upgrades to your gear and also to buy vehicles. You would need the fame to be able to unlock it, but you'd need the currency to be able to buy the vehicle. So that way, you don't have a whole bunch of people just flying around in ornithopters, rocketing people and shooting them out of the sky and stuff like that. Because obviously, if you get an ornithopter, you're not going to be able to loot a body unless you land to loot it. This allows that if this pilot gets shot down, he won't be able to go immediately buy a new ornithopter. He's going to be on the ground for a little bit, regathering up more currency. And of course, like I said, with the fame, you'd have to kill several people on the ground to unlock the fame. Once you unlock it once, you would not need to re-unlock it. It would just be a matter of gathering the currency. This would allow people to also have ornithopters that they're not afraid of losing. They could also then get other vehicles, whether it be the sand bike, the buggy, things like that, to move around freely. But there's huge swaths of territory that could be fought here in so many different ways that aren't being taken advantage of. The event would allow you to respec freely. So that way you could change your spec if maybe that sniper build that you were playing out in Haga Basin's clearly not working. Maybe going more of a swordsman, maybe going more of a Bene Gesserit. Seeing what kind of matches in PvP. Once you leave the event, your spec would revert back to what you had before you entered it. So you can't just enter it, respec, leave, and use it as a free respec. You can respec within the actual PvP event as much as you want. I know you'd be able to run up here and fight. There wouldn't be any threat of worms. But the item that you'd be able to get at max fame with the most currency would be a thumper to maybe summon in at least a decent sized worm. Doesn't have to be one of the big crazy ones from out there, or even some of the size in Haga Basin, but something that would definitely uproot a battle. And even if the person did get eaten, it wouldn't change anything, because they'd go back to the ship, maybe have to restart at aluminum, or, you know, and having to rebuild from there. And then throwing a cooldown on how often the worm can be summoned by either side. That way you just don't see worm, 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 worm all over your map, because they just spammed worms. This could technically go on for the entire duration of the deep desert. It necessarily doesn't have to be the 8 hours like I said, but that would be an option for them to be able to turn it on and off. There would be defensive points to not only assault, but to protect. They could add in bases to assault and attack. And then holding those bases could get you fame, it could get you a flow of currency, or other materials that could be used in various different ways. But imagine you're sitting there and you got a Harkonnen gunship right up there in the sky, kind of like how you see that. And then you look this direction, there's Atreides ones, and you got ornithopters coming out of it. You've got buggies, you got people fighting. This is just a barren hellscape. There's bases. I don't even see other players. But with a scale of 3 sectors, you could even add in maybe a little bit the tip of this sector, stuff like that. Spice to the deep desert. I'm not talking about the stuff that you scoop out of the sand, but actual gameplay that has meaning to PvP, and there'd be no fear of losing anything. There still, of course, would be the normal PvP going on in normal deep desert, stuff like that, but here, there wouldn't be a fear of losing that to other players. There wouldn't be really anything to gain. Now, if you were killed and you had currency on you for buying a vehicle, that could be looted. So if you get too much currency at one point and you were saving up to buy that sandworm thumper and you get killed, maybe that guy takes it back to his base and buys something. So it also has a role of how greedy are you going to be for power? You know, maybe you were trying to get to that ornithopter. Maybe you just needed 2 more credits. You're fighting a guy and all of a sudden another guy joins in and you die and you've just given them an ornithopter, basically. You know, as your fame goes up, maybe when you die you have more credits. Maybe you get credits over time in your inventory. There's so many different ways they could approach that. But as always, everybody, if you liked my 5 points, make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, and come follow me on Twitch at _Dab86.